Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we have a special guest here, Emma, and she's my classmate at UofT Medical School. So Emma, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. So I grew up in Windsor, Ontario. That's where I went to school too. I did my undergrad at University of Windsor's physics program, and then I did my master's as well at University of Windsor physics program, and I specialized in laser physics for my master's degree. And then I went on to get a job at a laser company for a couple months before med school, basically. I had a partial career before med school.
That's great, but you were making like some savings before medical school, which is much needed.
Yes.
And Emma has a really fantastic, like very non-traditional but like amazing background. That's why we really want to hear your story today, because physics, goddammit, it's so hard.
Yeah.
And challenging. So can you tell us a little bit about why did you go from physics to medicine? Like how does that story evolve?
So it was kind of an interesting story. I changed my mind a lot of times as a kid of what I wanted to be when I grew up, but it always kind of oscillated between I want to be a physicist and I want to be a doctor.
Right.
So like the passion was always there, and there was like a couple reasons I chose to do physics. Like it was my favorite homework to do in high school, so I was like, I really just want to enjoy my 4 years before I get to medicine.
Yeah.
But eventually, like I kind of realized through my physics degree, I was like, I'm still really interested in medicine. It's still a topic I was quite passionate about. I didn't get to take nearly enough bio courses in my degree, and I realized like, I really kind of miss that side of science.
Right.
And I miss having that perspective in science. And so I decided maybe in my third year that I was going to end up pursuing medicine.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a bit of a short story, actually.
No, that's
it's just
good.
always interesting.
So you wanted to pursue medicine in your third year undergrad, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and did you take the MCAT as well? Was that like a more challenging progress for you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. The whole biology section was just so daunting, like, because I didn't have a great background, a great foundation in biology. It was, I remember studying cell biology for the first time, like in third year university. Oh my gosh, not the best entry point for cell biology.
Yeah.
Better to do it earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the biology section, very challenging for me. The organic chemistry section, still challenging for me. Still not good at it. Chemistry was a bit better. Obviously, like physics was fine. But even like the psych and the cars, like extremely challenging. And I had to spend like 4 months basically that summer studying.
Right.
And like 2 months to get the content down, 2 months to practice. It was difficult for sure. And the first one didn't even go that well.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you rewrite afterwards?
I did. And I actually found that like more practice that time around was a lot better for me. And it also helped that I had the base content down from last year too. So I think coming from a non-traditional background, it does take some work to get there, and you have to be ready to fail. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if our audience is anyone who's from a non-traditional background, who's non-science, what kind of recommendation or like preparation tips would you give them if they wanted to, try the MCAT out?
I would say start as early as possible. And break it up into little chunks. I mean, everybody tells you that for school, right?
Yeah.
But it is so helpful, because if you try and do multiple chapters in a day, you're going to be so daunted and overwhelmed all the time. And that's not the feeling you want to take into such a long exam. Yeah. So you start with like the simpler topics, start with the littler chunks, make sure you're integrating practice throughout, because if you don't integrate the practice, it's going to be so hard to apply it when the time comes if you're not already practicing that. So doing the easier passages, doing the ones with less questions, making sure that you're like actually understanding it before you move on to the next set of material. And then also, like, I know they're expensive, but sometimes those MCAT courses really do help, because they take you through it really slow. They make sure you get it. You have an opportunity to ask questions. Again, they are expensive, but sometimes they are worth it.
Got it. What are your stats for GPA and MCAT, if you're willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my GPA, I don't know the weighted, because that was over a year ago and I completely forget. My regular, I think, was 3.93 on average. And then, although it is like possible to get a 4.0 in physics, just you might not be.
You gotta be a genius.
Yeah, you do. I think the first one I got like 505, and then the second one I think I got 518.
Oh, that's a huge
improvement. Yeah. And like cars on the first one too was like 122. And then the second one was like 128.
Okay, that's actually competitive. Good job.
Thank you.
We'll shift gear to like the other side of the, application is like other than your stats, your extracurricular and your background is also important. So I'm assuming, kind of building your ECs as pre-med is like kind of like a classic, but not so much for other non-science or non-pre-med students. So were you consciously, trying to prep up your EC even though you're in physics before you even thought about getting medicine, or how does that process work for you?
So I mean, personally, it wasn't just about doing the ECs for medicine. It was also about doing ECs to like actually get experience in other things so that if I didn't get into medicine, I would also be a good candidate for a job, basically. Because I think ECs are important, genuinely, no matter what career path you do. Obviously, they're important for medicine. It's so hard to get in without ECs, right? But like, it's also important for a job because people want to know that you're a good communicator, that you're a good leader. CanMeds applies to more than just med. It applies to like corporate America, like truly. And so it's important to have those experiences. But my ECs, I think, were a lot different than a lot of the people's because they mostly focused on physics. It was all very, like the common thread through all of them was a passion for physics education, physics research, community outreach in terms of physics teaching. So I certainly tried to work on building up those ECs, one, to apply for medical school, but also just to like, one, enjoy university experience, make myself marketable in the job market, etc.
That's a good point. So I assume you mentioned that a lot of your ECs are physics focused. So when you want to shift gear into medicine, when you submit your application, how does it pan out? How do you justify, like all the strong physics background and then going into medicine? I'm sure you have, I don't know if you do that in interviews or in your essays. How did you navigate that process?
It is difficult, but I think the best piece of advice I heard in undergrad was do things you love because it doesn't matter if they're not med related. Your passion for something, anything, will shine through on your application and on your interview. And so I kind of really followed that advice. I tried to make sure I had little bits and pieces here and there. Like I also volunteered for peer support as well because I was passionate about mental health too. So, that one was a little bit easier to tie back to I care about people. But it's all about marketing yourself in terms of transferable skills. Like truly, because a lot of what I did was like physics education for kids. So we would host events where we do these crazy cool demos, like the fire tornado is still my favorite demonstration ever. It's like this huge literal fire tornado. I love that thing so much. And like you teach kids about angular momentum in terms they can understand. So you hit things like communicator, collaborator, and CanMeds, right? And it's really just about kind of not being so superficial with it of like, oh, if I am so into physics, it doesn't mean I don't like medicine. It just means I'm trying to develop skills that are useful to every aspect of career development. So really just like framing everything in a way that brings it back to CanMed.
What is the benefit of having a non-traditional background in physics? What do you think that helps in your application and going to med school?
I mean, one, it gives you a very diverse skill set and it makes you, at least when you get to medical school, I think it makes you really marketable when it comes to research because like in physics or engineering or math, you're going to learn how to code regardless of whether you like it or not. You're going to learn how to code, which is so helpful when it comes to stats and it comes to picking up those kind of things. I think it also makes you, all of science makes you a good problem solver, but I think math and engineering and physics makes you like an exceptional problem solver. And also physics is just one of those things that I think you get so many transferable skills out of, especially if you do what I did where you actually engage in the community, you do the ECs, you do the TAing, the research, right? I think it gives you so many transferable skills that I'm not sure you would get in a lot of other places. Like explaining angular momentum to a child is difficult, but it helps you build your communication where you like learn how to actually talk to somebody who doesn't have the same vernacular as you, right? So I think, I think in general, just like transferable skills, that's like the big takeaway, honestly.
Well, what do you think is one of the most challenging part of having a non-traditional background?
I mean, the biology. Quite honestly, the biology, that was difficult. Like in the first, especially the first couple weeks of school, I was like, oh my God, like what am I doing here? This is so hard. And especially in anatomy too, because like we do not have a lot of room in our schedule in physics. It's very packed. There was no time, no option to take anatomy, even though I was super interested in anatomy. Like, I remember my dad used to show me x-rays when I was a kid. Because he used to be a chiropractor, and I loved the anatomy, I loved the x-rays, but I never had time for it. And it was really hard and really overwhelming coming into lab with zero background knowledge. Like, I knew what a bone was, but that was it. That was the extent of...
I am hearing it. Me too.
It's kind of scary, and
you
feel like an imposter, and you feel very out of your depth, but it honestly resolves within like a month or 2 months, and you realize like, oh, I transferable skills. I was able to learn physics. I'm able to learn this. It just takes a bit of a
learning curve.
Kind of a rejigging of how you study, but it's not that hard.
I'm sure it's like physics, like one of the known for to be like a challenging program. So how did you maintain a high GPA, which is quite important for applying to medical school?
It was certainly very hard to do, and quite frankly, kind of involved sort of sacrificing work-life balance, if I'm being totally honest. Like, it takes a lot of work to master some of the math, for sure, and of course, like, the amount of homework sets that you get are infinitesimally high. And you really honestly, like, you do have to sacrifice a bit to be able to stay like academically in a good position to go to med school. So, losing a little bit of sleep, not going out very much or at all some years, certainly very challenging, and not for people who like really value the work-life balance. Sometimes I wish I actually valued it a bit more, because like, it was just so much work that, sometimes when you do so much work and you kind of lose the plot. Or you kind of lose the passion. Like, that was certainly very prevalent. Like, in my department at Windsor, it was very, it was a lot of hard work. And of course the profs would always say like, we know it's a lot of homework, but you have to know this. But they're also training you to be like a career physicist. And many of us are not going on. Like, we're doing the program to get the transferable skills to be able to be an engineer, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be whatever, right? So certainly quite challenging. That's the one part of my degree where I'm like, that was a bit much.
And how did you console yourself whenever you're feeling that, like, oh, what is the point of this? Why am I working so hard for like something I don't know if I'm gonna get?
That's a really difficult question. Sometimes, honestly, you just kind of got to put your head down and keep going and not think too much about, until you have a minute to actually sort through it emotionally. Sometimes you kind of just got to put your head down and soldier on, which is not the best answer in the world.
But it works.
It works.
Yeah.
It's not fun, but it works.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it's like there's no right answer to this. It's just like how you cope with things.
Exactly. And everyone's going to cope with it differently, right? Some people will actually take the time. God bless them. Take the time to for self-care. Whereas like many of us in that department were very like, we got to know the science, we got to know the physics, we got to like continue. There's no breaks until this homework session is done. Like, it was a bit intense.
How do you think your non-traditional background in physics influence or impact your career choice in medicine?
That's a really good question. So currently I'm quite interested in radiology, interventional radiology and radiation oncology, and that's mostly because of that sort of physics aspect. So like during my education, I focused a lot on like laser science, which you would think like, ophthalmology. But actually I took a course in my master's degree that I never really got exposed to before, but it was radiobiology. And we learned a lot about the actual radiation oncology bit. We learned a lot about like acute radiation syndrome and things where radiation was very pertinent in medicine. And I kind of realized through that course, like, oh my gosh, this is a whole aspect of physics that I never really got exposed to before, and I actually love it, like a lot. Like the science of radiation is beautiful, and that it's not derived from first principles physics at all. So it's so like stochastic and statistical, and it's just so cool. And so that kind of has shaped my view of like, okay, I do want a job in medicine that kind of coexists with physics, which honestly exists in a lot of different specialties, right? Like ophtho, there's a lot of kinematics going on. Ophthalmology, there's a lot of lasers, and then in Ortho, there's a lot of, that's what I meant to say, there's a lot of kinematics going on. Vascular surgery, there's a lot of engineering happening with like pressure in veins, pressure in arteries, right? So, but basically this whole sort of, I guess just education and radiation, and then also light, the physics of light, has kind of inspired me to, you know, follow that path of like radiobiology, and then actual radiation sciences as well. And actually we got to do a really cool project in undergrad where we programmed a Monte Carlo simulation. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it's like it's what they have to do like the dose depth planning in radiation oncology.
Oh, cool.
It was so cool, right? And we just did like a basic one from a regular old cathode ray tube. But that was something where I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like I really would love to be a part of that when I'm older, right? So whether it be imaging or interventional or actual cancer treatment, I think sort of that experience and my whole education has really set me up to like do something that's very like critical thinking, very physics involved, with a little more of the light lean instead of the kinematics lean, right? I mean, I love kinematics, but not that much.
No, I got you.
I don't think anybody loves kinematics that much.
Okay. Emma, you mentioned that you decided to pursue medicine in third year of undergrad, but you went on getting a master's and then worked for a few months before you get in. So can you tell us a little bit about your application process throughout and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, so my application process honestly took like 3 years to get in. So after the summer of third year, I wrote the MCAT. I think I ended up getting like only a 505 or something, which wasn't good enough, as you know, to apply to a lot of different schools. So I don't think I sent out any applications that cycle, rewrote again in fourth year, did a lot better to the point where I could actually apply, which was nice. So I applied in fourth year and did not hear anything back. So I ended up applying for my master's because I was like, well, you know, I might as well pursue my other passion of physics in the meantime, right? And again, to make myself more marketable in case I never got in, right? So I then applied halfway through my master's, didn't get in again. Finally applied when I was about, for a third time when I was a year and a half through my master's. And then, you know, you submit the application in September. I was defending in my thesis in December. And basically I got a job offer in November. So I was like, I might as well take this just in case nothing pans out, right? So I didn't get any interviews until the very last cycle, which was the first time I applied to Toronto. This is the only interview I got. It was a bit crazy. I ended up getting waitlisted too, but here we are.
Congratulations, here you are.
That
seems like a very long journey, but like a lot of hard work putting in, and glad you're getting good results back.
And I also learned like during that whole thing of, you know, like when you're an undergrad, you kind of get sucked into the pre-med and you're like, med school is like the end-all be-all and yada, yada, yada. I kind of learned through my master's after not getting in and then applying for a job, I almost like rediscovered my passion for physics again, where I was like, oh my God, if I don't get in, I could actually be happy doing this. So it kind of taught me like, you can really be happy doing a lot of different things, not just med. So it gave me a lot of perspective, honestly.
And do you find that having like another alternative path built for yourself kind of alleviates some of the stress you have when you're going through that medical application?
Absolutely, because I felt like even when I was a bit sucked into the whole pre-med thing, I still felt like I have a pretty good backup plan, and that makes me way less anxious. I know some people are very much of the mindset of like one thing and one thing only, right? But if I don't have a plan B, C, D, E, I'm not happy. So it was a lot easier for me knowing that I had, one, something I enjoyed doing like tremendously, and two, that it was a very marketable skill in a lot of different fields, in fields that would make me happy. It made me a lot less anxious through the whole process.
That's good. And if you were to look back through your application journey, is there anything you would have done differently were you to go back in time and redo this all over again? Probably not a pleasant feeling to redo it again, but if you were to redo it again.
You couldn't pay me to redo it again. I honestly don't think so. I think I made every decision with a lot of intention and a lot of thought. I would absolutely go through physics again. It was really hard, but I think it built a lot of character. And I think you know, I think it was important that I kind of chased something else that I was passionate about too.
Yeah.
While also trying to juggle getting into med school.
Yeah.
Because like I say, like whenever people say like, oh, what degree should I do? I'm like, well, you're going to be in school for 4 years. You might as well do something that makes you happy.
Yeah.
Right? So there's almost nothing I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
Through that whole thing.
Yeah. That's a good perspective. And so going back to the application process, want to focus mainly on your last one because you got UofT for interview. So what do you think you have done differently in your essays or in your preparation that may result in the success?
That's a good question. I feel like when I wrote essays before, I was trying so hard to focus on what have I done that's like earth-shattering. Right? Like I've solved world hunger or something. Like I think the biggest thing I did was just focus on something that was actually important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, let me throw out the idea of it has to be earth-shattering. It has to be this monumental thing. It doesn't have to be.
Right.
You really just need to like speak from the heart. That's what I did for my Toronto essay, where that was the question of what did you learn about yourself through COVID or something?
Right.
And I think one of the things I said in that essay was basically just like I kind of went like stir crazy in the home, and I need to be around people sometimes. I need to have somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
That was genuinely what I wrote in my essay.
Yeah.
And like of course I linked it to like, okay, this is what I did with that lesson, and this is how it like is attributed to medicine, but it was something that felt so mundane to write about, but yet it was so important to me. And I think that's what really contributed to actually getting a result this time, was speaking about things that weren't so like big, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like sometimes you try to find like the really unique messages to write about, and yet if you don't resonate strongly with that message, you can't really be genuine when you write about stuff, right?
Exactly.
Unless it's something like really common, you can twist it in a way that's really personally unique and meaningful for you, and that's what really stood out for a lot of people.
And honestly, if you have a story for that sort of mundane lesson, let's call it, that actually like really resonated with you or helps you, talking about that story in the essay makes a world of a difference, I find at least.
Yeah.
Because I could actually speak about it in a genuine way and really put like, you can be more concrete about what you learned when you actually understand what it is you're writing about.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'd say that was my biggest. I don't think I changed anything about my ABS.
That's good.
Right.
Tying it back to the essays, how did you prepare for the interviews, and what are some tips you would give to the audience who potentially are receiving a UofT interview in the next coming year? Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, I hope for them. So what I did was actually a little bit different because I was in a bit of a different situation than most people. Personally, I really only had 4 days to prep because I needed an accommodation for the interview. But there's still a lot you can do in that really short timeline. So what I did was I basically took 2 to 3 really high impact personal stories that I remembered from undergrad. Could have been like a high impact experience or some story where I really learned a lot about myself. And I went through a bunch of different interview question stems and just tried to apply the same scenario to that stem over and over and over again, basically, right? So like talking about that story from the lens of like the collaborator pillar, or talking about the lens from like the leadership pillar. And thankfully, like I had some friends who were willing to help me during that very shortened timeline because they wanted to see me succeed. So there was like a couple sessions where I did, because it's asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, they said, okay, make sure you record yourself, practice that. I did that for like about 1 day, basically, because of the shortened timeline. And then I also spoke with some friends who had gotten in previously, gave a brief rundown of some of my answers. They gave me some feedback. We kind of did like a shortened preparatory like phone call, basically.
Yeah.
So that was basically it. It was just like, I would recommend you maybe prep a little more than 4 days.
Yeah.
But if you're in the situation where you can't really prep more than 4 days, you really gotta like pick the most high impact stories and really just practice reframing them in any light that you can, basically, because every story has like multiple lessons. You can't just take one lesson from some major life event, right?
Absolutely.
You can reframe it however you want.
Right.
Yeah.
And in terms of how you deliver the answer in the interview, do you have like a specific framework, or you just kind of go with the flow? What did you recommend?
It kind of depends on the question, honestly, because some of the Toronto questions, it took me a little off guard where I was like, I don't even know if I can apply a framework to this.
Right.
For the most point, I think I applied, what's it called, the STAR framework. I can't remember. I think it's like situation, task, action, result, or something.
Right.
I applied that for a lot of the questions that kind of involved a personal story. So I think I ended up actually working it into most of my answers.
Okay.
But some of them, sometimes you just kind of got to go off the dome,
right?
Quite frankly, like some of them were a little bit, I was like, oh, you know, I wasn't really expecting a question like that. I might just have to like think quickly. And also the other thing too is like, if you ever have to go off the dome in an interview, you like, don't be scared to take a moment to pause.
Right.
You're allowed to stop talking for a couple seconds. You don't have to fill the silence. You don't have to say or like. That would be kind of my biggest piece of advice, is just like pause. You need to pause.
And practice pausing as well. It's a good practice.
And honestly, recording yourself pausing will make you feel less awkward about it when you do it. Because I know it sucks to watch yourself, but then once you do it, you're like, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. You wouldn't notice it if you watch it again.
Exactly.
And that makes it you feel a lot better to do it again.
Exactly.
In the actual interview.
And I know a 2-second pause feels like an eternity, but it truly doesn't to the person watching it. It feels normal, actually, to the person watching it.
Okay, awesome. And just one final question. If you were to give yourself, when you enter university, or someone entering university or in high school right now thinking about medicine but thinking about something else, what advice would you give them?
I think honestly what I said earlier of like, you've got to be in school for 3 to 4 years anyways before you get into medicine. You might as well do something you actually like, and something, if you're like me where you need a backup plan, something that's going to give you a backup plan that you will actually enjoy getting a career out of, right? Like if you're so focused on med and like you really just want to take that biomed stream, like that's great. I'm so happy that you can do that and not be anxious about it. But personally, like that just doesn't work for me, and I know it doesn't work for a lot of people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So follow your passion, your other passion other than medicine.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with us and
thank you for having me,
Emma. And I'm sure your stories will help a lot of people who are deciding medicine and another career path. And thank you.
Thank you.